just in the simple act of kind of sharing something you created or sharing your story, you're creating all of these connections and you're helping people,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that I love about stories and narratives and sharing those, is that it's through those things that you can give your pain meaning. It's through those things that you can validate what you went through, because you can start to see how it can create these connections or these positives or these relationships you wouldn't have had otherwise. You give other people permission to feel their truth, and share their truth. There's just so much power in that.
Hello and welcome. I'm Abbie. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told, and today I invite you to join me in a previously recorded conversation, which was originally released in February 2023 with Madison Wood-Gonzalez, as we take a communication perspective on, just so many things: postpartum, creativity and imagination, death and dying, and storytelling in all of it, to name a few. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it using our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we use curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Madison Wood-Gonzalez. This is a conversation that I am reposting, which was originally published in 2 parts in February 2023, and is such a valuable conversation to be returning to right now. As part of our series around healing, this conversation touches on healing in so many different ways and healing through storytelling in so many different ways. So even though this conversation's a little bit all over the place, I think a lot of it is really connected, even if it might not seem that way on the surface. So I'm really glad to be able to share this conversation again with you. Before I get too far ahead of myself, I do want to pause here and remind you that we have a survey going on for our community. I'd love to have you help me co-create the next season of the podcast. I'm beginning to reflect on what the next season of the podcast should look like. And I'd love to know what you get out of the podcast, how you're using the podcast, what you'd like to get out of the podcast. Anything you're willing to share, I would love to hear about and be in dialogue with you about. So the link to that is in the show notes for you to participate and help co-create this podcast. I really appreciate you participating. And without further ado, let's return to this conversation with Madison. Madison, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, and I'm really excited to talk with you today about storytelling. It's one of my favorite topics.
Me too. And on that note, keeping in mind that the context of this conversation and the direction of it is going to be a real emphasis on storytelling, could you please introduce yourself?
Okay, I could definitely introduce myself, and I could definitely talk for 20 minutes about why I'm into storytelling and my story about storytelling. But I guess I'll just start with the basics. My name's Madison Gonzalez. I am the executive director of a nonprofit in Indianapolis called Morning Light. And we serve the terminally ill who have nowhere to live at the end of life, or no one to support them at the end of life. And they come and they live with us. And so that's a mission that's very close to my heart. But it was through my work there that I got so involved with telling stories, because these individuals had such unique perspective that they could share. And I realized that once we could capture those and kind of shed a light on their uniqueness, that the community really came and rallied around our mission. And so I had one individual in particular whose name was Richard, and I can talk, more about him, but he kept a journal by his bedside, and his final entry was, "Too many of us leave this world with our stories untold." And that spoke to me because I realized I hadn't really been sharing my story. And so I started writing poetry, and I started journaling a lot and kind of processing some things. And it was through, telling myself my story that I really kind of learned a lot about who I was. And so on paper, I'm all kinds of things, but in my, personal life, I'm a mom of 2 kids. I'm engaged to be married, and that's a whole exciting odyssey in itself. But I just, I have a lot going on. But I think at the root of it all is, just trying to stay true to who you are and what's important to you, and learn a little bit more about yourself, every single day. And so I try to help other people do the same thing. And so I teach on storytelling. I've taught quite a few, workshops on it. I speak on it quite a bit. And so for you to reach out and ask me to talk with you, and I know we have a background, was just really exciting. So I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, that's a great start. And I guess, yes, the one thing I will add to your introduction is that we do go way back, because you used to babysit me 20 years ago. Is that probably accurate?
I think it must have been about 20 years ago. Which
I'm
makes
23
me sound
now.
100. No, okay, so let's go with like 15 years ago.
Okay, there you go. There you
knock
go.
a couple of years off. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, out of my own curiosity, a small story to start is, do you have any memories of babysitting us that stick out? Any specific stories, or is it a haze?
Okay, no, that's funny. I think you two were my very first kids that I babysat. And so, I've always had this want to be a mom, right? And I remember as, I don't know how old I was, but I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. And I remember at home making a list of fun activities. I just hope they like me, and I just hope they have fun. And I remember, I think you guys had one of those little, little tyke, red and yellow cars.
Probably,
something like that. And
this sounds right.
Wearing myself out, pushing you guys around in the basement, just so that you guys would think I was cool.
That is funny. And I think about that because I did a lot of babysitting as I've been growing up too, and even nannied these 2 kids for a summer. And they were a little younger, maybe 4 or 5, and then a couple of years younger. And that was I spent so much time with them that summer. And I just wonder, are they even going to remember me at all? Is this going to shape them at all? And I think maybe, they might not be able to say, oh yeah, Abbie was our nanny in the summer of 2019 or whatever. But I'm hoping in some small ways, whether they know it or not, the things that I did with them and the things that I don't know, taught them, or how I showed up for them, stick with them.
Oh, totally. And full circle, your mom is now head of children's ministries, and my little ones, Julia and Bennett, they're 8 and 6. And I know they've gone out to breakfast with your mom, for VBS, and have gotten to know her. So it's just one of those things that, we're all just kind of shaping each other, I guess, in turns.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really neat too, to think about that big cycle just ongoing and ongoing and ongoing.
Absolutely.
Okay. So first of all, as I was looking back at the questions I sent you, I was realizing that they're kind of hard ones that I thought, I would actually be hard pressed to come up with an answer to these on the spot. They're pretty big ones, but I think they're good ones. So I'm hoping that we can, kind of still work through these together.
I'm pretty good at thinking on the spot, but I also did come prepped with some notes. Good. And these are things that I talk about a lot.
Good. You're practiced.
I'm up for the challenge. I hope the answers are suitable, but
absolutely. Yeah. I'm sure it's just your story. So there's no right or wrong. So, okay. Well, as you know, the first thing I want to talk about is understanding you more. And the way I want to do that is, who are you today? But first, how did you become who you are today? And so I think the question I want to ask around that is there a story that you remember hearing or living, or, being a part of or witnessing in your life that shaped who you are today, that you can kind of look back, connect the dots, and say that is part of why I am where I am today?
Well, I think definitely the person that I thought I was going to be, and kind of the narrative that I had of myself when I was, in my teenage years and my early 20s is extremely different than the person that I am now. And I can tell you my personal story, but I also can tell you my very favorite story.
Please.
Yeah. So my very favorite story, of all time, is Lion King. And I'm a Leo, and I am a Disney fanatic. So I think Disney, is still definitely something that I look to for good quality stories. But Lion King, and I know it's a cliche, but to me, whenever I watch it, it's very much about not being able to really escape who you are. The person that you are will find you no matter what. And you can try and hide from that, but you shouldn't have to. You should learn to celebrate it, even when it's a challenge. And that, the scripts that you're told when you're young, the things that you think that maybe you did, or the things that you think maybe you can't do, those are just scripts that can be rewritten. And in the exploration of who you are, you can really rise to the challenge, and who you are is needed. And so I guess I love that story. Lions are my favorite animal. The music's bomb, it's all good. But I always love watching that one. And I think, I kind of lived an essence of that, because who I thought I was going to be a stay-at-home mom. And, that was what I put on a pedestal ever since I was little. Like I said, I had this kind of need to be maternal and just loved kids, and thought that I would just want to raise them myself and stay home with them. And I thought that was super important. I had my daughter, absolutely loved it, and decided to have another baby. And so I had my son, almost 2 years later on the dot. And boy, was I not prepared for what was going to happen next. Not only was 2 kids just exponentially harder, but I was hit with some pretty severe postpartum.
Yeah.
And so postpartum is one of those things that I try to share a lot in my story, because I do think it's not talked about a whole lot. I do think that, there's some shame around postpartum. Does it mean I'm not a good mom? Does it mean I don't love my kids? Like those kinds of things. And I was just not ready for that. And so that really manifested in a lot of different ways, but it made me a very anxious individual. And I was having, panic attacks, and I was staying home with my kids and doing my best to be a good mom, but I was suffering. And it was about 2 years that, I was trying to get help or trying to figure out something, to relieve the anxiety. And ultimately it came down to, I need to go back to work. And to me, that felt like I was admitting defeat. And, I don't sit on one side of the spectrum or the other on whether, mom should stay home or go back to work. I think it's unique to everybody. But for me, I had a narrative, and I had a script that I wanted to hold. And so it felt like I was failing myself. It felt like I was failing my kids. But I decided to go back to work. And my background is in special events. So I love celebrations. I have always, been about planning birthday parties and holidays and exciting things and whatnot. I had done exactly one wedding and decided I never wanted to do that again. So when it was time for me to go back to work, I knew I wanted to go into the nonprofit space and hopefully use my special events to maybe help raise some money for a good cause. And that's when I ended up at my job that I'm still at, which is Morning Light. But it's funny because I went back to work part-time, less than 20 hours a week, just doing administrative stuff and getting to have a couple opinions on the special events that we were throwing, and then you fast forward to 5.5 years later and I am executive director. And what happened was I realized that I had all of these skills that I didn't realize were skills. I also realized that when I thought I was going to be stay-at-home mom, I also, under the surface, somehow thought that I didn't have anything that was going to be of value, to the workplace. And I didn't know that some of these things that came quite naturally to me, such as writing, such as, speaking, such as events, such as XYZ, these things that, I just thought were me and that's fine, but nobody's going to employ me, were actually extremely appreciated. And so it was a little bit of like coming into my own by force. I was dragging my feet. Like I did not want to go back to work, but I was not happy in the situation that I was in. And so I think sometimes, if you're self-aware enough, you can pay attention to some of the signs that it's time to do something different. But if you're not, your body or other forces are going to force you to do something different.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And it's through that I think then you can kind of start to realize, okay, maybe I am meant for something else, or maybe I am meant for more. And so now, I look back and I am an executive director, and I promise you, I never in a million years thought I was going to be that.
Yeah.
But I'm very proud of my journey, and I'm very proud of a lot of the challenges that it forced me to really face, and a lot of the insecurities that it really forced me to challenge within myself. It's my hope to empower other people to just explore what they're good at, explore what their interests are, explore your story, see what the false narratives are, because you might be holding these things, about yourself that either you were told somewhere, adopted subconsciously, witnessed somehow, and challenge those things, explore it in a 360 way, because sometimes it's the thing that you really think you're not supposed to be doing that maybe you are supposed to be doing. And now I'm, able to still be a good mom, and probably a better mom because I'm in a much better place mentally and make a difference every day for a living. And so it's very rewarding. And I guess, not to sound super duper corny, but it's kind of like Lion King, right? Like he went off into the jungle and like Hakuna Matata it and like did not want to like face what was, scary to him or what he thought he had screwed up or would screw up or whatever, but he was needed. And so that's a little bit about kind of my story and some of the things that forced me to be who I am today, but I'm pretty proud of it.
I think you absolutely should be. I can really appreciate the way that you have come to understand your story, and that I love that you use the phrase that, telling your story to yourself, because I think, there's something in you live your story. This is kind of how we frame it in this, like, looking at communication, looking at life through the lens of, it being a million little stories, is that you're living your story. And then that's not always exactly the same as telling your story, because you attach all of this meaning to it. And it's because you're looking through the context of maybe you're able to say, oh, that's kind of like the Lion King. Or like you're talking about, maybe you're looking at some of those stories you were handed and saying, that doesn't actually line up with my own experience. And I think that's so huge. Yeah. And being able to understand your stories that way, because to me, it's empowering.
Exactly.
When I am the healthiest, when I am the most peaceful, is when I feel like I have a better understanding of, and when I'm able to frame my story in a way that's helpful to me.
Take control of the narrative.
Yes. And I love that already in our conversation, which, I think can continue, is that a good theme and a good frame is celebration. And that seemed to have just kind of presented itself in your life. It's not like you were necessarily saying, okay, celebration is really important. Let me go see how I can work that in. It's something that maybe when you look back, you say, oh, okay, here's a through line, whether it is celebrating who you are or your entire job of hosting these events that bring people together to be able to celebrate and do something awesome.
Absolutely. I always say, when you are able to tell yourself your story or put your story to paper, you can start to identify these kind of common threads, these golden threads and these themes that, you maybe didn't realize were so prevalent in your life, but this keeps showing up and this keeps showing up and this keeps showing up. And so what does that tell me about either the patterns that, I've created for myself, the things that I'm interested in, the things I want to keep doing, or the things I want to stop doing?
Right.
And so, I'm glad that you picked that word, because celebration is my favorite word. It really is.
I think it's great. And it's probably not something that I've used to frame my life, but this is why I love these conversations, because I get to borrow, whatever cool things you have to say or that you've already come up with, because I think it's definitely one I want to think about more. And, something that maybe seems like on the complete opposite end from celebration, your experience with postpartum is really still just as tied in, because like you're saying, not that it's, seems easy or like logical that you would celebrate postpartum experience, but there is a layer there that you're saying, I'm going to talk about it.
Right.
And claim it as part of my story and not be ashamed about it, because it's important for me to do that. And it's important for other people to see you doing that, because that's what lets other people know that they have permission to be honest about that being their experience.
Exactly. And, that's an interesting, I'll have to think on this a little bit more, is kind of celebrating the things as a way of claiming them, because what are we doing when we're celebrating? Does it have to be something that's positive, or could it just be something that you are lifting up, and making a show of a bit? Because I guess, it was probably one of the hardest things that's happened to me, but it is something that I am, I don't wish didn't happen to me, because I wouldn't be who I am, right? And I wouldn't be where I am. And postpartum taught me a lot. taught me a lot about my own limits as a human being. And it taught me a lot about not resisting what's not meant for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And ultimately it was postpartum too that led me to start writing, which, I'm a poet, and that's how I choose to share my story. When I teach on storytelling, everybody can share their story in different ways, right? Through photography, through public speaking, through poetry, through art. There's so many ways to capture and share your story. My medium is poetry. I like the abstractness of it. I think it can be universal, which is true with, photography and art as well. But it was my poem about postpartum called The Pit, which was my very first poem to be, published professionally in the Indianapolis Review, and kind of the poem that I shared that then got me some traction and got me interviews and these different things. And I thought it was so interesting because it was just something that I wanted to put to paper, and it was just something that I remember thinking, when I'd written it, I remember thinking, do I keep this to myself? Do I share this? I don't want people to misjudge me. I don't want people to know about my postpartum because I don't want them to think I'm a bad mom.
Yeah.
But it was actually when I shared that poem publicly that I got tons of emails and whatever, about, hey, I had the same exact thing. And I don't know anyone else who has experienced this. And I don't know who to talk to. And I don't know what to do. And, suddenly, just in the simple act of kind of sharing something you created or sharing your story, you're creating all of these connections and you're helping people, Yeah. And I think that's something that I love about stories and narratives and sharing those, is that it's through those things that you can give your pain meaning. It's through those things that you can validate what you went through, because you can start to see how it can create these connections or these positives or these relationships you wouldn't have had otherwise. You give other people permission to feel their truth, and share their truth. There's just so much power in that.
Absolutely. You're making me think two things. First is that my theory is that the things that feel the hardest for us to share, the stories that are the hardest for us to share, the ones where we feel really vulnerable, we're really kind of, saying this is me, this is, a very raw version. It's not polished, maybe some of those stories where we messed up or we didn't know what we were doing. We maybe didn't look the best in those stories. They're so hard to share, and they're the ones that we most need to share. And they're the ones that we most want to hear from other people. It's like,
Absolutely.
I know how I feel when other people share those kinds of stories. I feel like connected to that person. I feel like I can really know them on a deeper level. I feel like we've talked about the permission to also experience all those things. But there's the flip side of it that's a little harder, is that it's harder for me to step up and want to share those things. So I have to keep reminding myself that these are the best kind of stories, actually.
Absolutely.
The unpolished, messier ones.
Absolutely. And I think too, something I've noticed in myself and that I'm still not perfect at is I can share my vulnerable stories once they're wrapped up with a happy ending. It's the ones that I'm experiencing in live time that I have trouble saying, hey, I'm still struggling with this.
I'm in it right now. Yeah.
I'm in it and I don't have a solution yet. I don't have the answer yet. Those moments are extra vulnerable for me, and probably something that I'm still not super wonderful at doing, to be honest. And so I do wonder sometimes if the observers or those people who are needing permission, to step up and share their story are the ones that are still living it. And they might be quiet, they might be just watching from the sidelines. They might just be reading what you have to say, but knowing that that is still having an impact on them, even if you're not aware of it. I love that idea of kind of just, it's like this, I have a tattoo of it. It's this dandelion image of, you don't know where those seeds are going to land. You don't know what is going to, grow from that, but that's not why you do it. You do it because it's the right thing to do. You do it because it's a release for you. You do it because it's your authenticity, and that's important. But you don't always know the impact that your story is going to have. And you may never know the impact that your story had on somebody. But I think it's still just a cool concept to know that your words, your experiences do have power, and give others permission, like you said.
It's okay. So the perspective I come from is that, so I graduated from college in May of 2022, and I studied interpersonal communication. So that's kind of the lens that I just see my whole life through. And so one of the phrases that we use is the creative power of communication. And that's to say that, it's our communication that has the ability to create these better social worlds for ourselves. And I was going to ask, does that idea resonate with you in your poetry? But I can already see that the answer is yes, from how you just explained your poetry and especially your whole process with your first poem and putting it out there. And like you said, seeing the effects, but never really being able to know the effects, is that you seem to recognize that your communication of these ideas, your communication of these experiences through poetry is in and of itself creating something new.
Completely. Yeah. You create opportunity for connection. You create opportunity for others to see the world in a different way or to feel less alone, which I'm a big believer in that need to create. And I think that I think that everybody has it within them to create, right? We are both creation and we are both creators, and we are not one without the other.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful.
And so I think, it's a way to connect with others because we all have that ability, and you don't know what you create might, spark in someone else to create and then someone else to create. And so I just love that ripple effect.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about creating, creativity, and those words obviously having the same root, but I think about them so differently. And then the other word I would throw into that mix that I've been thinking about is imagination, and thinking that everything that exists in our world started in somebody's imagination.
Absolutely.
I felt maybe very disconnected from imagination. It's not something we talk about, but it's so important. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think it connects also to empathy in our relationships, in our communication, because you have to be able to use your imagination to empathize with people.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah, right. I've never really framed it that way until recently. I've just been playing around with these words, but I love those ideas of being in your imagination more, maybe being more aware of it as a force. And also, like you're saying, seeing yourself as a creator. And there's, you're creating things in big ways. You specifically with the work that you do, there's big things that you're creating there. And then also on a much smaller level, there's creation going on. Even you and I talking right now is creating something new into the world. And that's how I felt with my podcast, that I can look and see how many listeners I have. And I'm like, okay, well, I know, 30 of these are my mom listening to all these episodes. But then there's, 2,000 more that I'm like, I don't know who these people are. I don't know how it's hitting them. I don't know what their context is, what I'm speaking into. But I trust that, once it's out of my hands, it's into their hands, and the people do with it what they need to do with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's that's such an exciting concept is, being able to make a difference. I've been doing some reading on brain waves and brain frequencies, and it's talking about how, obviously when we're younger, everything is creation, everything is imagination to a kid. Nothing is either possible or impossible. They can create their own reality through playing pretend or through, observing things. And up until a certain point, even when you're watching a movie, you don't know if this is real or if this is imagination.
Yeah.
You can't decipher. And it's talking about how, adults trying to get back into our, meditative practice in our heads to create the brain frequencies that then allow us to think outside the box, because, it's hard when you're an adult and you have a to-do list as long as your arm and all these different people are needing things from you. And some realities, harsh realities probably, and solutions become more difficult to come by in a way because everything seems so concrete. But if you're able to get back into that meditative brain space and kind of try and remove some of those stress blockers that keep your brain from having these pathways and this energy and this flow that allows you to think differently, it's so important. And again, I think, what you said about empathy, you need to be able to open your mind to other versions of reality, because your version of reality and your story isn't the same as everyone else's. And I remember being so kind of mind blown when I realized oh, that's not important to everyone else, or, that's only important to me, or, oh, that's only ever happened to me or them or XYZ, when it's through that realization, you're able to realize that there are millions of versions of reality out there, and we've created them for ourselves. And through that empathy, being able to understand that maybe there's other ways to look at something. Even the same story has two sides,
Yes.
right? They say this, every story has multiple sides. And so my version of that story and your version of that story might not look the same, but it's in honoring that person's humanity and that person's creator in them. We all have a creator within us, and we all have a ability to create. That's just fact. And so to honor that in each other is what connects us together, in my opinion. And so you don't have to see that story the same way, but you can still respect and honor a story that someone else has shared. But I'd never thought about imagination and empathy being kind of almost one and the same. And I think that's really a cool way to frame that.
Well, like as an example, even you sharing your story about your experience with postpartum is not only important for the people who have also experienced postpartum, like that's valuable for me to hear that story, or other people that have not had experience with postpartum, or maybe know people that have experienced postpartum, but don't really know what it was like, because then we get to use the imagination, the empathy to step in and to really see your humanity, see the humanity of other people that experience that. And I just think that's beautiful.
Definitely. And, I do think even if it's not the same exact scenario, people can find grains of themselves in all kinds of situations. And, when you're listening to a story, what you're really listening to is how it fits with you. Can you see yourself in that story, and which elements of that? But then you're right. It's the next step that means, okay, I can't see myself in that story, but I can still understand its importance and value. And I think, the more we can encourage people to try and look at things that way, the more unified we will all be. Yeah.
Yeah. I also write poetry, and that's not something that I've done. Like, I guess, okay, I did get one thing published at my university, but I don't know if you experienced this. I look back at old things I've written, and sometimes I'm like, that's only kind of okay. That I don't know what I was thinking.
For sure.
And then sometimes I look back and I'm like, I'm a genius. That's amazing that I wrote. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important. I encourage everyone to go back and reread their old work, because sometimes I think you're telling yourself something you needed to hear today back then. There's things that you might write that you forgot you wrote, and then you go back and you're like, oh my gosh, I really needed to hear that today. Thank you, past self, for telling me what I needed.
So I think it's interesting, though, to think about, like you're saying, these different levels of our storytelling, of telling it to ourselves, telling it to maybe one or two other people, telling it to even more people than that. And, seems like you've had experience with all of those, since you do have a book of poetry, which is super cool. And by the way, I have, because my mom told me that you wrote it. And this, even before we talked, this is like last year I've read this book from you.
That's so cool.
And I loved it. And I think it's really powerful. And so I just love to hear you talk more about your book, Dear Mirror, and how it came about, and, what it means to you.
Okay. It was about 2019 that I picked up a pen, and I didn't put it down for like months straight. and really, it's funny. Dear Mirror is funny because, like you said, sometimes I even look in that book and, like, full transparency, I'm like, oh, that could have been better. And I've written so much work since, and I have another book coming out, but that's still very like in the rough copy. And I think it's a little bit different than Dear Mirror. But Dear Mirror, I think I was writing it to myself, right? It's Dear Mirror, it's Dear Self. It's broken into 4 parts, right? And there's different kinds of mirrors. You have your mirror that distorts things. You have your concave mirrors, which are internal. And that's a distortion of your internal view of yourself. You have your convex mirrors, which are external, which is the world's, version of you that maybe isn't accurate, right? And you're still seeing yourself through their lens. And then there's refraction, which is when a mirror, starts to distort light and change the direction of light. And then there's reflection. And so the journey through Dear Mirror is taking a look at maybe some of the internal scripts I had, external scripts I had, the changing, the moment you start to realize, like, hey, maybe this isn't actually accurate. And then the reflection and trying to see myself for who I really was. And so that was such a cool experience to write that and get that published. And I mean, it's just a very fond time in my life, but I still keep writing, and I have, I share online, and I've been in literary magazines and whatnot. But it was through my writing that I think I really came to realize some truths that I really didn't want to, but like I said, needed to be recognized for healing and for moving forward and to really stepping into yourself. And so I'm just a big fan of poetry, and
Yeah.
I'm engaged to a poet as well. And so it was through the writing of poetry and then sharing that online. He, I guess, started reading what I had to say and liked that. He is a incredible poet, like blows my stuff out of the water. And so obviously I started reading his stuff and liked what he had to say. And it was actually
Aw.
through our poetry that we were like, I kind of like dig, your view on the world and what you
That's
have to say.
so
You
sweet.
clearly have a deep soul. Like, do you want
Yeah.
to talk on the phone sometimes? And then
Oh,
we started talking on the phone every day. And now, almost 3 years later, we're getting married in May. So poetry has the power to connect. You know what I mean? I'm
uh-huh.
not, this isn't a plug that you're going to go find like soulmate or whatever through poetry,
Right.
but I do think it's a good lens to see into what people are thinking,
Well, I was going to ask, which we've kind of danced around already, what does poetry mean in your life? And it seems like it means everything. Like it's brought you to the person you're going to marry. It's brought you so much healing for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question. What does poetry mean to
Yeah.
me? I mean, I think poetry is just my form of art and self-expression. When we talk about creating, it does require some imagination, and it's how I get in touch with some of the more abstract parts of my brain. And quite honestly, I haven't been writing it as much as I wish I could be lately because real life, there's too much real life going on. And so, that's a theme that keeps showing up for me right now is when I start losing time for my art, I know that's time for me to slow down. Because if you start losing time or putting off the time to connect with yourself and your emotions and your thoughts and your dreams and your hopes and your issues, whatever, you have to make time for yourself. And so whatever that looks like for somebody, it's important. But to me, it looks like sitting down and writing poetry. So it's connecting to myself, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's important to make time for yourself, and it's important to make space and quiet enough to actually listen to yourself. It's kind of what we've already talked about with stories, which would be, my answer to the question, what am I like paying attention to? What's a theme that's coming up in my life? Is this idea of, for most of my life, I've always looked outward to other people to kind of confirm, like, what do you think about this? Is this the right choice? What should I be doing? How does that person feel about what I'm doing? Looking for like consensus among people. And there are people in my life whose opinions I do care about. But really, I was looking to everyone else to tell me what I should want, or to give me those scripts and say, okay, this is what your life's going to look like, rather than, I guess I couldn't distinguish between what I wanted and what I thought other people wanted of me. And so that's something I think about a lot and kind of have been trying to grow away from. And it's a hard practice to find stillness enough in myself to actually distinguish, okay, what's my voice? And how can I find consensus not out there, but in here, like between like my head, my heart, my soul, like what am I wanting for myself? And for me, poetry is also a way that
100%.
It brings that out of me. Yeah.
There is so much noise. There is so much noise out there, so many different ways you can be bombarded with noise. And I think probably now more than ever, it's hard to put it down. It's hard to escape it. You've got it in the palm of your hand and everywhere else. Finding that quiet time used to be very scary for me. I think that's something that I was exploring a lot last year, was kind of noticing how friends or myself just needed one person to confirm or give me permission to do something I knew I already wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do it, but it's like, I'll go ask this person. And if they say yes, then that's the green light. Then I've made a good decision. So it's like you said, finding enough time with yourself to figure out how if you're making a good decision that's right for you or not. And getting in touch with what your body and intuition is telling you about certain things, because it knows, it knows, you feel it in your gut. If you're doing the right thing, you feel it in your pulse. If you're excited about something,
you just have to learn to listen to your body's signals, because it's telling you things. It's
true.
Just, there's not a lot of areas I think in your life growing up where you are taught how to listen to your body.
Not at all.
You are not really taught to speak the language of your body.
No. And that's like, I'm going through something right now on, the somatic nerve, and it's got, it's the biggest nerve in your body, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the nerve that's triggered when you're having traumas and XYZ. And this stuff needs to be taught in schools. We should be taught that as little ones, that if your feet start to tingle, like that's telling you something. If your throat is catching and you are, your mouth goes dry, like what is that telling you? And what does that mean? And I know, when you're little, it's hard to kind of flesh that out and like explore that entirely. But if you can start to learn those trends, that your body is telling you, we might be able to shut out some of that noise on the outside world that we use to either distract or get confirmation that, we're okay. Yeah, we're enough. Yeah, we're doing the right thing. Everyone else is, or everyone else thinks this, or these 5 people I care about think that. And checking in with yourself and having enough time for quiet is so important, because your body will tell you in quiet ways. But if you keep going down the wrong path, it will tell you in loud ways that
right.
knock you out. And so I know you had said, what's something that you're paying attention to a lot in the world or in my life. And for me at the moment, it's burnout. I have a bad habit of, burning myself out on a routine basis and trying to catch it earlier in the process so that I don't get to that point.
Yep. And I think that's one a lot of people are.
It's a common
playing
thing.
With right now,
I'm seeing it all over the place, in work, in my personal and professional life. I know a lot of people who are going through it, and I wonder why. It's like, why?
I think it speaks to something bigger, right? Like, if every single person I talk to could say, "Oh, I've felt burnout. I'm currently feeling burnout. I've experienced burnout." I think it's less about what am each of us individually doing wrong? What are each of us doing wrong? True. And more like, okay, let's talk about the society and the culture that we live in that raises being busy. And because, this, like, I guess I'd call it like a productivity culture of like your value comes from what you can produce.
Completely. And glamorizes the busier you are, the better you are, the busier you are, the more important you are. And I did read something that said, step 1 of burnout is this strong desire to prove oneself.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts, and so then it becomes, okay, why do I need to prove myself? And what am I looking for? And, why don't I feel enough as I am? Why do I have to push myself to this point of exhaustion all of the time? And I think you're right. I mean, I think it's definitely systemic and societal and cultural to be as busy as possible. So more than ever, it's important to make that time to listen to yourself and write some poetry, right?
Yeah, because it's like you're saying, it's not a surface level problem. So I don't think it has a surface level solution. Where if you're like, okay, I'll just not go to this one event, or I'll just do this one thing. If you're doing those actions, that's good. But if your belief under it doesn't change,
amen. Yes.
Then those actions are kind of meaningless to, your deeper experience of life, because maybe you said, okay, I'm taking this day for myself, but deep down you believe that you actually don't deserve a day to rest.
Oh, so
or
true.
You shouldn't actually take a day to rest because it's selfish or whatever. Then that's not actually going to be a good day of rest for you.
Absolutely.
And so you need the time to actually, get in contact with, your inner self and rest. But, it's hard.
Yeah. Being in alignment with yourself is a lifelong process, right? And I think that's important to recognize too, that can change over time. What that looks like, what you need, who you want to be that day. It doesn't have to be the same every day, and what used to work for you might not work for you anymore. And just checking in with yourself on a routine basis on what does alignment mean to me in this phase of my life, so that my actions are stemming from my alignment with myself and not to prove myself to anybody else, So that's a good point though. It's definitely not surface.
We've talked about maybe some stories from your childhood that affected you. You were a part of my childhood and have surely shaped me. What is the story that you are hoping that your kids take with them from their childhood?
Oh my goodness. Oh,
I know. Sorry, came out of nowhere. I've been sitting on that one.
That's such a loaded question. I want my kids to see 1,000 little stories of them being allowed to be themselves. I want my kids to see that they don't owe anything to anybody but themselves. And that doesn't mean don't be a good person and not, consider others, but it means your life is yours and you have one life to live. And if we aren't on this earth to enjoy it, then what the heck are we all doing? The theme throughout is that I very much try to just empower them to make their own decisions. What do you think about that? And I hope that when they look back on their childhood, they can see that they have the privilege and the power and the permission to make the decisions that are best for them. That's all I've got on that one. But
no, that's great. I know. I'm sure that could be its own podcast
that
episode.
Could be its own podcast entirely. I guess that's my just philosophy on motherhood and life. But that's what I try to embody for them. And I did it for myself. So, I had to make some pretty tough calls that they've witnessed and been a part of. And I've had to explain to them, this is why I had to do this. And it's tough decisions, right? It's like hard decisions that maybe don't make sense to anybody else but you. But I hope that being able to watch me do that for myself, they can do the same thing.
Okay, so moving on to talk about your work, tell us more about Morning Light.
I would love to. Morning Light is one of just a handful of houses, truly homes, in the entire country. We are located in Indianapolis, and we are a 12-bedroom facility. And at 12 beds, it puts us at the biggest home in the whole country like this. But we take care of and provide shelter for and a home for individuals who are dying. It's a heavy subject. And, to talk about death and dying is a taboo subject out here in the West, in good old USA. We don't talk about that. We put death in a box a lot. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but one that needs to be had because it's universal.
Yeah.
So when somebody is put on hospice, and hospice is 6 months or less to live, and they don't have an address to claim that benefit, we provide that address. And so it's called the Abbie Hunt Bryce Home. So good name, good strong name, Abbie. Yeah, it's called the Abbie Hunt Bryce Home. And we have served over 800 people at the end of their life. And they come and they have a warm bed and they have 24/7 care. They get 3 home cooked meals a day and just are validated as human beings before they pass away, because it's really our mission that everybody deserves dignity at the end of life. And I don't really care what you did. I don't really care what you look like. I don't care where you came from. When it comes time for you to, take that journey into the beyond, we just don't want anyone to do that alone. And so beyond basic needs, we're really about helping people feel seen and heard and valued in their final days. And that ties very much into story for me, because it was pretty quick when I started working there that I thought, we need to be capturing these people's stories. They have incredible stories and also can really bust some stupid taboos about homeless populations and individuals who might find themselves, in that situation. Because there's so many different ways that society can kind of fail a human being. And a lot of it starts early in childhood, right? But a lot of it is different. Everyone's story looks different for why, they came to be where they are. And I find their stories very powerful because I find them stories of resilience.
Yeah.
Very resilient people willing and open, to share what they've seen and what they've experienced in hopes that through that they can shed some light on some issues. And so I think Abbie is unique because it captures a lot of individuals who were failed differently by the system. And then we can start to have conversations about that and how do we avoid that in the future and help people not be in a position where they're terminally ill without anywhere to go and without anyone to help them. We always have a waiting list, at 12 rooms, we always have a waiting list. And like I said, we're the biggest one in the country. They come and they stay with us for absolutely no cost to them. We don't charge insurance. We are a nonprofit. And so we fundraise through the community. We have special events, seek out grants and that kind of thing. But we run completely on community support. And so it's a very unique mission, very unique operation, something I didn't ever realize I would be doing. When I started at Morning Light, I didn't even know what hospice really was. But I do think that that speaks to the power of story, because I pretty quickly caught on to why it was important and needed, and really just a beautiful gift to someone.
Like you're saying, the obvious way that stories are a part of this is in you collecting almost the stories of the people that come stay at this home.
Yes.
I think the other way that stories play into this is that you're actually telling these people that get to come stay at the home, you're telling them a new story, because the story they've heard their whole life is, you don't really matter. We don't really care what happens to you. There's no support system for you here. You are different for whatever reason. You are discounted. People are going to look the other way. People aren't going to show up for you. That is the story that probably a lot of these people have heard their whole lives. And so you're telling them a new story. I think that's incredibly powerful.
Thank you. You said that perfectly. Can I have that on a clip?
yeah, I'll write that down.
You really did. You nailed it. Yeah. I mean, that's the goal, right? Is to hold space for them and give them a different story before they pass away. And for many, like you said, for many of the residents that have come to Abbie, it is the first time that anyone's ever told them that we care, or that we're here for you, or that you matter. Sometimes people cannot even believe they're going to have a bed. They cannot even believe they're going to be able to count on food, you know, and those are just basic needs. Once you get those needs met, and you can go to the next level and tell them, not only are we going to feed you, but we're going to love you too. It's a lot. It's a lot for them. And, you know, when you talk to a lot of the residents and you ask them what they're afraid of, it's not dying, it's being forgotten. And so I also have, you know, a mad passion for legacy. I think stories can create legacy, and it's important to look back on legacy, because you can see where we're coming from and see where we're going, and you give people a chance to live beyond themselves. And that's what stories can do. You know, by capturing those stories, they know that they won't be forgotten. They know that their message or their experience, their perspective or their opinions, you know, I mentioned Richard earlier. You know, Richard, his very final entry of his book was, "Too many of us leave this world with our stories untold." And I have that framed because it's so true, because there's so much to learn from every single person. You know, there's so much to learn from everyone.
That's kind of cool for you to have that as like a guiding light.
Yeah, it was really the catalyst for me. You know, when I read that, I was like, you're darn right. I don't want to leave my world, you know, this world without my story untold. And, and, you know, that was back in 2018, and I'm still telling his story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah, he'd be happy about that.
I think that's one of the powerful things about stories too, is they have this power to live beyond you.
How do you go about collecting the stories of the residents right now? Is that more like on a personal level as you interact with them, you're getting to hear their stories, or do you have any way that you're kind of, you know, bringing them all together so that other people can hear their stories as well?
Yeah. So right now, when I'm collecting stories, it's more of me sat, you know, bedside and, you know, do you mind sharing a few things? And sometimes you don't even have to ask, you know, sometimes people are extremely eager to share their story. And once they get going, you know, there's no stopping them. And I think that's awesome. Other people, you know, might take a little bit of opening up, but trying, you know, as we move forward this year, to consider the other ways that people can leave their legacies too. So, you know, like I said, right now it's really kind of me and my team sitting down and asking questions and capturing that and then sharing those, but trying to also get art therapists in, you know, so that they can create artwork that can be left behind. And we have a company that we work with who actually did a fundraiser for us because they loved our mission, and they come in and they help our residents write songs. And then record those songs that then they can give those songs to family or friends or to us to have, you know, a song that they have written. Encourage those journals, you know, journaling. And also, I think, you know, trying to facilitate any amends that need to be made, you know, between family members, so that the story that that person wished that family member knew about them can be heard. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because I think a lot of the time it's just a matter of communicating, you know, it's a matter of having the openness and the willingness to listen to why something happened or why someone was the way they were, even if you didn't agree with it. but we're really trying to break down any barriers. We actually have a Russian speaking individual right now. He had come from a shelter, and he had been living at a local shelter for, a decade. And then is on hospice. So of course we welcomed him at Abbie. But he couldn't talk to anyone, he couldn't say anything. And I'll say, in Indiana, Russian speaking individuals are not easy to come by, but it was just like kismet. I was talking to a friend, and I was just sharing, sometimes we have these individuals that I can't communicate with, and that's really difficult because I don't want them to feel unheard. And she's like, oh, well, one of my good friends is, she speaks Russian, and she's been wanting to volunteer at a hospice. And I was like, really?
Oh my God.
Yeah. The next day, this woman comes in, and this, kind of gruff and angry man who, wouldn't say anything to us unless it was asking for a cup of coffee, is sharing his story. And we know, now that he's spent years working on boats and building boats, and, he's got 2 kids, and they've been estranged, but through her words and through her communication, because not only did she come that day, she's come every day since.
Wow.
To talk to him. That gentleman's son is coming to see him, and, they haven't spoken in years. And it's through that communication, right? I mean, a language barrier was keeping him from being able to connect to another person who could then facilitate a connection with his son. I just think, I get chills. It's like, it's crazy. And that's the power of, communication. If you're talking about creation, right. And change and communicating and stories, it really did come down to words. It really did come down to language and being able to just communicate with somebody.
Yeah.
And now this man has been validated. He doesn't have to die feeling like no one cared enough to try to get to know me or hear what I had to say. And that's what we do. That's what we do at Morning Light.
What is it like for you or for the people you work with to get to know people, to start building relationships with people, knowing that they're so close to dying?
I think it takes a special person. I don't think it's for everybody. Everybody has their calling in life, and hospice is not for everybody. It can be really hard. And, we have had individuals come to work at Abbie and think that they're going to be okay with it, and realize that, no, this is too hard. I can't do this. And that's okay, but I think, for me, getting to know these individuals, it's about the life they have left. It's not about the fact that they're dying. And I think that that's something as a culture we need to do a lot better of, is even if someone is terminal, even if, someone has a limited time, they still are alive, and they still have life to live, and they still have experiences to be had. And by pulling away or just saying like, yeah, no, I don't want to get too close to them because, I'm going to lose them soon, you're denying them of that life that they still have left. And so I guess for me, it's just trying to frame it in that way. And also it's comforting to know that even though they're going to pass away, we're making a difference. We're making a difference for them. And that's enough. I do have a story though. We had a woman named Penny. Let's see, this would have been 2021. And, as you can imagine, Penny had just had a horrific childhood and just lots of abuse and different things in her life. And that story kept repeating itself, into her adulthood, and just really no one had her back. And the system failed her from a child all the way up through. And she was very forthcoming with all of that, but she had a very positive spirit. She still had a smile. I don't know how. I mean, sometimes I'm like, I really don't know how people are smiling or still here today. Like, wow. But she was super positive and just really generous with her spirit, and had cooked a Thanksgiving, meal for all of the residents in the home. And our residents, find little ways to give back to each other, even though they're sick, even though they don't feel well, they still want to contribute. And I think that's important to recognize too. But she had cooked a Thanksgiving meal, and every year we have Santa come to the home and do some rounds. And so the week of Christmas, Santa Claus, came to the house, and he stopped in a Penny's room, and she just lit up. And she said, "This is the first time in my life I've ever met Santa Claus in person." Her, whole life, her whole childhood, like no one had ever taken her to see Santa. And here she is, on hospice, but she's meeting Santa for the first time, and she's so excited, and she's asking him all these questions about his reindeer and getting a present and, all of these things. And she died 2 days later on Christmas Eve. And I just think that shows you the amount of life people can still live even up until their final moments.
Yeah.
And that it's so important not to just, oh, well, they're dying, so let's just kind of wrap it up. It's like, no, give them as many experiences and as much happiness and joy and validation and life, as you can until you can't anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think it's with that mentality that we get through, but it's hard, my staff experiences a lot of grief. Sometimes you make connections with that one person, that really gets to you when they go. And so trying on the back end to have, grief support opportunities and people they can talk to, or self-care, self-care is so important when you're caring for other people. We talk about that, burnout and whatnot. It's not for the faint of heart. And so you really do have to be making sure you're taking care of yourself so that you're not pouring from an empty cup, as they say.
Yeah, it makes sense that, that environment is not for everyone. But overall, I think we do ourselves a disservice to, always be looking away from death and those, big, scary things that are outside of our control a lot of times. Because, like, you kind of alluded to earlier, other cultures definitely do that better than us about how do we honor a person's life? How do we give them like dignity, and how do we celebrate their life when they die instead of just turning our heads the other way and saying it's too painful to look, because it is so painful.
Absolutely.
And like you're saying, you all experience that real grief every day, probably, in what you do, but that's not to say it's not something that we should keep leaning into.
Right. It's part of life, it's absolutely a part of life, and it's part of someone's story. It's the one common denominator we all have, it's going to happen to all of us. And, people lose others in varying degrees. And that's, of course, difficult and can be very triggering for people. But I will say that I think the more we can have these conversations, the less shocking, the less out of control it will feel. The more prepared you will feel. I lost my grandma in 2020. And if I hadn't been working at the Abbie Hunt Bryce Home, I wouldn't have handled it nearly as well as I did.
Yeah.
And I was able to go in there and hold her hand and, say I loved her and tell her she looked pretty and, just take care of her. Whereas I think, maybe if I hadn't had those experiences before, I wouldn't have known what to do. I would have felt kind of uncomfortable. I'm not saying it wasn't difficult.
Of course.
In fact, yesterday was the anniversary of her death.
Oh, wow.
And so yesterday was, a hard one for me. 3 years later, it's still hard.
Yep.
And grief doesn't go away. But it's a sign of love, right? And it's a sign of your humanity. And it's a sign of honoring someone else's humanity. And again, I don't know what's really more important than that. So
yeah.
Definitely things that I would love to see more conversations and maybe storytelling,
Absolutely.
Maybe some stories about that so that we know what to expect when that comes, when we come across that in our own life.
Yeah. With your perspective you have from this job and your experience you have, I just wonder if you have any, different insight onto why you think people are so afraid of conversations about death or talking about end of life or being in that end of life moment with other people.
Well, we're afraid of the unknown. I think, people are afraid of what they can't assign a name to or understand. And we don't know what happens next, right? We really don't. And so sometimes it's the mystery that's scary for people. I think pain and loss is scary for people. Sometimes it's easier to take control and say, no, I'm not going to do that. That's making a decision than putting your vulnerability on the line and just kind of being open. Vulnerability is hard for people. But I do also think culturally, it's a taboo subject. And even if someone has lost someone, oh, do I say anything? Do I ask them about that person? I don't want to remind them of that pain. You're not reminding them of that pain. They have not forgotten.
Yeah.
It's isolating to feel like nobody wants to talk to you or bring these things up when they're the elephant in the room. They're the glaring thing that just happened. And also giving space for all of these like weird emotions that come up, like anger, like being mad at that person, for having the audacity to leave you,
Right.
That's real. Or just these weird things that we maybe haven't experienced yet. and don't know that we're going to experience because it's not being talked about. And so it makes it that much more isolating. I think that death and dying and having lost someone is one of those silent things, in society. It's just one of those things we just don't bring up. We don't talk about it. And I do feel like when you give something a little more air, it can become a little less isolating and a little less painful. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's the unknown of everything.
Yeah. Yeah. The unknown, the out of controlness.
Yeah.
Makes
sense. Not having
to
control
me.
Is very scary. It's very scary. But it is interesting. Like you said, in other cultures, multi-generational living is a lot more common, right? It's a lot more tribal. You take care of the kids and you take care of your elders. In the West, in the United States, it's like a badge of honor for everyone to have their own home, to be independent. And the kids are independent and the parents are independent and their parents are independent and we're all living isolated. I think it's good in a way that we're having more conversations about what that isolation looks like.
Yeah.
Because COVID, of course, really put a spotlight on what that looked like for the aging population and just how out of touch they were with their family. And, we can't go see them and they're in this kind of facility. And it was really painful, really hard for a lot of families. And so my hope is that, unfortunately, that pain maybe sparks some more conversation about how we can start to unify families a little bit more, or friends or communities or whatever it looks like. But I do think, it just lends itself to kind of the glorification of being independent and isolated and not needing anyone else. A, and then B, our busyness culture. We don't have time. We don't have time to take care of each other. We don't have time. We have too many things to go out and do.
Yeah.
I don't have time to take care of, X, Y, Z. So reevaluating what's important as well.
Yeah, I think it's horrible and at the same time glaringly obvious to say that the idea of nursing homes is, almost like a systemic manifestation of all the ideas you're saying that happen on a personal level, almost like a out of sight, out of mind. It's like collectively as a culture, we have said we are turning away from death. We're going to put it in this corner where only a few people have to really, really engage with it. So the rest of us don't have to engage with it at all.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what would happen collectively if we all tried to get ourselves a little more educated and comfortable on end of life and what that looks like. And end of life doesn't just mean the last 5 days, it's the last, however many years.
Right.
And these people are still people, these people are still alive. They still feel and see and do. And, how do we honor that? How do we honor that better as a culture? That's a challenge that we're going to have to rise to. Yeah. Because our boomers are aging and we're about to have more people in need of care than we do caregivers. And so we're going to have to come up with something. And I guess to me, that always starts with conversation and it always starts with a story. So, these are some pretty sad stories of individuals who fell through the cracks or who didn't have anyone. We have to do better.
Yeah, I think not to make the process of death, the process of grieving into like a technical thing, but kind of what you're getting at is that you have to get educated. You have to learn. Skill is probably not the right word, but like you have to learn how to grieve, learn how to deal with these processes, these painful processes that are inevitable. And I think there are ways to learn. There are conversations to be had, stories to be told that can teach us how better to handle this. So that instead of saying, I'm not equipped to handle this grief, I'm not equipped to walk into this pain right now, so I'm going to walk the other direction, to say, okay, maybe I have some tools in my tool belt that make me feel like I can take a step forward, that I can lean into this pain. Because you're like, oh, it's sad to look at this, I'm going to walk away. It's sadder to walk away, I think,
I think ultimately long-term, more pain, and not just pain for yourself, but pain for other people. And if, collectively as a society, we all decide to do that, that's not a pretty sight. That is not a pretty sight. And we're all going to be there someday too. It can feel far away sometimes, like, oh gosh, that's, decades from now. I don't have to worry about that. Well, if we don't change the culture, we are going to have to worry about that. And you're right. There are so many tools for grief support. There are so many tools for preemptively planning what you want that death to look like. You know, there are so many options and things available for what death planning looks like, so that you can take control. You can say, this is who I want to see. This is what music I want to be playing. These are my favorite smells. You know, this is what I want to happen afterwards. This is what I want read to me. This is who I want there. This is what I want people to know about me. And you can start to take control of it a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just go, yeah, no, I'm just going to like kick that into the long grass for as long as possible, you know, it looks a little different. Thank you for allowing a platform to have this conversation, because I know it's a unique one and a different one maybe than you've had before. But I think death is as important to a story as many other aspects.
Absolutely.
You know, it's still part of it.
I think I'm like all about getting back to seeing people's humanity. And death is just a non-negotiable part of that. It is like the most deeply human thing. And so how can you, you know, really look at people and see them for their humanness without talking about that, I think. And I think it is like, you know, even coming into this conversation for me, I was putting myself in a very much like, I'm just kind of here to learn and ask questions, because I also don't know how to have those conversations. Not equipped for that.
And I really wouldn't have known either if I hadn't just kind of found myself in this position, right? And this job. It wasn't something I sought out, but I feel lucky to have been around people who know what they're doing, you know, and then I can absorb that. And then I could bring that to my own family when the time came. So I think, you know, I would just encourage people to at least be open-minded and exploring what that looks like, and asking questions, and just put your toe in the water if you're not totally comfortable. But you're right, it's a non-negotiable. It's going to happen to all of us. And I'd rather kind of know what to expect and feel like I have a little bit of, you know, you wouldn't, when you're about to have a baby, you do a little background, you know, you kind of read, you get a couple pamphlets at the hospital, you kind of learn like what's up, you know, how often do I feed this little person, and how often do I would say, you know, we should be doing the same thing when it comes time for death too.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be scary. That's a taboo that needs to go away, because it can be beautiful. You know, it can be very honoring and peaceful and sacred when someone passes away, and it's a privilege to be a part of that. So
absolutely,
it doesn't have to be scary. It can be sad, and it probably will be sad.
Yeah, that's not.
But sad doesn't have to be scary. Yeah.
Well, I wonder if you could share a little bit about what you've gotten to see in the Abbie Hunt Bryce home, as far as how does creating the space, giving them community, the best words, you know, I was coming up with, thinking of using my imagination to say, you know, what's probably going on in this space is that you're giving people community, you're giving people their dignity, and you are providing them safety. And I wonder if, you know, if people could understand the power of what you're doing there, if that might help them be able to lean into these conversations more. So I guess that was a long way to say my question is, why does that matter? What have you seen? What changes have you seen? What power have you seen that have?
Support is everything. I never ever say that we cure anyone, but we've actually had individuals come in on hospice, right? They've had a terminal diagnosis. They've chosen to no longer seek, you know, treatment, which is really what hospice is. It's just deciding, I would rather just be comfortable than continue chemotherapy, or I would rather just be comfortable than continue surgery after surgery. You know, I just want to accept my diagnosis. I don't know how much time I have left, but I'd rather not spend it, you know, in the hospital. And that's just a decision that some people choose to make, right? And so it's about those comfort measures. So you have individuals who are terminal and might be 90 pounds when they come to us. And then through some stability, through some love, through being able to count on some food and bathe on a regular basis and have a warm bed to sleep in, we've had people graduate off of hospice.
Wow.
You know, that just, of course, there's the conversation about, you know, health and how, you know, certain things can contribute to the quality of life and your health factors, right? And so we've had people actually leave the home and they're no longer dying, you know, and then we can help find placement for them. that doesn't always happen. And like I said, we don't cure people. That's not really the goal, but it's just proof that some stability can really have an effect on someone's physical state, right? But we've also had people, like I said, come to us at 90 pounds. And when it does come time for them to pass, they've gained like 50 pounds of love, right? Because we don't have special diets. It's like whatever you want to eat, you eat that. If you want chocolate cake every day, like we're not trying to, it's no longer about health, right? It's just about enjoyment. And so we spoil them. We cook, to what they like to eat and try to understand what it is that they like to have around. So people can gain weight. And, I've mentioned Richard a couple of times, and I think he's just someone who stood out to me a lot because he was one of the first people that I really connected with. And we have bricks at the home. So each year we have a brick dedication ceremony, and we have bricks that have their name, inscribed on the brick. And then we dedicate it into our brick garden.
Wow.
And he came up to me and he was like, what do I have to do to get a brick out back? And I said, Richard, you already did it. You're here. Mm-hmm. You've earned a brick. And, a tear rolled down his cheek. And he was like, that's the only place that my name is going to be after I die. And I said, but it'll be there, forever. And so it meant so much to him to just know that somebody was going to capture the fact that he existed. And so, I think when people are starting to decline, right, or when they're starting to enter those final phases of life, their brain really does start to go to, okay, what did I do here? Mm-hmm. What did this all mean? Will I be remembered? Did I really matter? And so doing that for people at the Abbie Hunt Bryce Home, and hopefully encouraging other people to lean into honoring elders and just letting them talk and, asking them questions. And if they're telling you the same story for the 10th time, listen, because it means something to them and they don't have much longer to tell it.
Yeah.
And, it's, again, I think it's trying to honor someone's humanity as much as possible. And whether that looks like comfort food or whether that looks like a brick in the back, just telling somebody that somebody cares. Again, if we're not on this planet to enjoy our lives, and then if we're not on this planet to help other people feel seen and validated and enjoy their life, then I just really don't know what the point is. Yeah. It's like, what's the point beyond that? You'd be hard pressed to find one, I would say. But yeah, it's just about humanity, really. It's just about validating humanity.
Yeah. I've already, hinted at this a little bit, that the kind of language that I would use is that we all live in social worlds, just kind of understanding, the relationships we exist in, the communities we exist in. It is a social world, and we have some power to, create the kind of social world we want. And I think I see that on a large scale of like the social world of our literal world, of our country, of our state, community. Mm-hmm. And then you also have the social world of your family. You also have your own kind of social world at somewhere like the Abbie Hunt Bryce Home, and it seems like everything you've talked about today is really pointing at some ways that you are intentional about the kind of social world you're creating, of creating a social world that has dignity, that has room for everyone's stories, that helps people to feel remembered, that they have some kind of legacy, whether it's just a brick or, living on through whatever stories or relationships you're forming. And I just think that's a really beautiful thing. I think that's
Thank you.
Incredible. And like you said, you're one of very few homes like this. And so this is not necessarily a social world that's happening everywhere, that a lot of people are getting to experience.
Right. And, my hope would be that those elements of, honoring someone's individuality and those elements of telling people that they're special and they mattered and just spoiling them, I hope those elements are happening beyond the Abbie Hunt Bryce Home, in other families or, nursing homes. I hope that we can do better collectively, but certainly, especially for our population, there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of telling people that they matter. And my hope too is that it doesn't have to wait until they're dying to do so. Mm-hmm. It's funny. There's this conversation out there about, living funerals. And I know that's kind of weird, but I find it interesting that we kind of wait until someone's passed away to send all these flowers and say all these nice things and get up and reminisce. and celebrate them. But what would happen if we started to do that for people before they died? What
Wow.
would happen if we started to do that for people, earlier on?
Wow.
Why do we have to wait until something like that happens?
Mm-hmm.
And so again, like it shouldn't take death to start honoring somebody. It shouldn't take, their life is almost over. I better kind of get my words of encouragement in there, So trying to kind of run that back and start that earlier in the process.
Yeah. Well, this conversation has been so incredible and insightful and meaningful to me. And I think for the people that will listen to this, I'm sure they'll be able to find some meaning in it, whatever it is speaking into their lives.
I hope so.
Yeah. The questions I just want to end on is one that I ask everybody. And I think for us will kind of just be a summary of many things that we've already talked about. But in your own words, how would you define a better social world?
I think a better social world looks like giving everyone resources and support and encouragement to really, fan their own unique gifts and their own unique perspectives, because each one of us has something to offer. Every single one of us has something we're good at. Every single one of us has something to say. And so creating more space for people to be able to just be themselves and, showcase their talents and do so without judgment, and showcase their opinions and do so without judgment, even if you don't agree with them. Not everyone is going to be the same. And that's kind of what makes a social world work, right? Like if we all look identical, that becomes a little scary. So I guess to me, giving people the permission to be authentic, to who they are, whatever that looks like, as long as you're not hurting somebody else, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. And not only will I not judge that, but I hope to celebrate it. That's my own words on that.
That's great. Yeah. Better social world includes more celebration for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Okay. And I guess I lied saying that was my last question, because really, what I want to end on with you is us, being creative, hopefully, and trying to come up with something that people that are listening and you and I even could leave this conversation with. And the language that I would use in the podcast is calling that a next turn, because that's a helpful way to look at the episodes that we're in of our interactions with people of our life happen in turns. Even our conversation now, you said something, so I said something back, and then you responded the way you did, so I responded. Those were turns back and forth. We both, again, created something new as we took turns. And then this podcast conversation is one turn. And so what's the turn we want to take next? So I wonder if we could come up with a good next turn. And for me, I'm thinking part of that is encouraging people to learn more about, how to grieve, how to be in those really hard spaces at the end of life with people that they love. And maybe even, learning more about even specifically what you do at Morning Light and even some of those other organizations that do the similar things that you do.
Yeah, a great next turn would be to go to morninglightinc.org
Yep.
and support us. No, I'm just kidding.
No, that's good.
Shameless plug there.
Yep.
No, really though. I would say a good next turn is being intentional about embracing all elements of humanity. And that's the good and the bad. That's the hard, and the fun. That's the highs and the lows. And, which parts of humanity do I tend to shy away from? Do I tend to avoid? Why am I doing that? How can I lean into those things more so that I am experiencing life in all its elements and with all that it has to offer? And I think also staying curious and asking questions about people who look different from you or sound different from you or seem different from you. And, doing your best to explore other different kinds of backgrounds, because you may find that somebody else's perspective actually aligns pretty well with your own and you didn't even realize it. And then, being able to find a little bit more about yourself through listening to somebody else's story, and honor those differences that may arise, and don't submit to other people thinking that your differences aren't unique or beautiful, because they are. That's loaded, but there's a couple next turns to take.
Yeah. I think that's good. That's good. And I think if people took even one of those things is a next turn.
Yeah. Sorry, that was 5 next
turns.
No,
that was great. That was great. If people took one or all 5 of the next turns, I see, that obviously would affect the turn after that and the turn after that. And it feels like this as a next turn is a small step towards the kind of better social world that we've already talked about throughout this whole conversation. That it's
I would hope so.
Those small things that really turn into these big things can create the better social world for us.
Completely.
Well, thanks, Madison.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been fun. This has been really good.
Okay, that is all for our conversation with Madison. At the end of each episode, I like to offer questions to reflect on, inspired by our conversations. These act as a next turn, so the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. Today, the questions I would have you think about based on this conversation are: what does it look like for you to celebrate? Where in your life can you pursue creation in any of its many forms as a way to check in with yourself and reflect? And finally, what stories do you have around death and dying? These are some heavy questions, and I'm especially grateful to be asking them in the context of our last conversation with Tracy around undigested stories and grief. If you haven't listened to that, I would definitely recommend you go back and do that, because these are 2 great conversations to be reflecting on together, as feelings of loss and grief are something that each of us will feel in different ways throughout our lives. And I think it can just be so helpful to think about the stories we have around these things. As always, you can reach out to me to share your reflections, as well as any of your own questions or ideas. You can do that through email, the website, by commenting on Instagram and YouTube, or by commenting on the CMM Institute Substack under this podcast episode. Links to all those places are in the show notes, so you can access them easily. The reason I invite you to share your reflections with me is to stay in dialogue. Other great ways to keep dialogue going are to follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation, and take that survey that I mentioned at the top of the episode so you can help co-create the next season of this podcast. It's a really quick survey, and I'd really appreciate any perspective you would like to share. I'm supported by the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. This podcast is just one of many initiatives designed to equip us with better communication practices so that we might create better social worlds. Another initiative of the CMM Institute is our fellowship program, and we have a presentation going on December 11th, 2024. You can register for that via the link that I've included in the show notes and by the links you can find on the CMM Institute website. You'll get to hear about the projects that the fellows this year have been working on, and it's just a really wonderful, creative, generative space. So I invite you to be a part of that if you'd like. The other initiative I want to point out is Cosmo Parenting. That is the next turn in our Cosmo Activities line of resources, and I have had the pleasure of helping to facilitate those resources since they will be a podcast coming out beginning January 2025. You can subscribe now to the Cosmo Parenting Substack so that when we begin releasing those episodes, you will get them right in your inbox and you won't miss a thing. Again, links to all of these things are in the show notes. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious, and thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.